Welcome to Women for Women International's Annual Luncheon. Please welcome your host, award-winning journalist, documentarian, and producer, Soledad O'Brien.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am so pleased to be here with all of you as the moderator and host as well of Women for Women International's 2022 luncheon, and I am thrilled that we're all able to gather in person to engage in these necessary conversations about the power of women in conflict. Please note, today's lunch has been pre-plated, and that means that you should feel free to dive right in and start enjoying your meal. Now, due obviously to the recent spikes that we've all been reading about in COVID cases, I would encourage you to wear your masks before or after your meal if that's something that makes you feel more comfortable. So often in life, and especially in times of conflict, women's voices are minimized and erased from crucial dialogues and critical peacemaking decisions. We know that women have the power to transform their own lives, but when they're undervalued, they lose this power. Conflict and war deepen this injustice. So today is an opportunity to not only learn how women are affected in conflict regions, but also to learn how to help shift that narrative by hearing from an expert panel on what it means to amplify women's voices and how to continue investing in helping women realize their power, which is something that Women for Women International has been doing for nearly 30 years. Through their signature program, Stronger Women, Stronger Nations, women in war-torn countries form support networks. They learn practical knowledge about their health, the resources, and information about their rights. They also learn marketable job skills and business training to create a stable income for themselves and their families. Women for Women International has reached more than 530,000 women survivors of war and conflict across 14 countries, including Nigeria, Iraq, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Afghanistan, and now, of course, those who've been impacted by the war in Ukraine and other locations as well. We're going to learn more about the organization and its impact from Women for Women's board co-chair, Delaney Steele, as well as CEO Lori Adams, a little bit later during our event. We're also going to play a video message from Seida Saric, the Director of Zene, Women for Women's sister organization in Bosnia and Herzegovina, who served as their first country director. Seida is going to share how the organization is helping women refugees who've had to leave Ukraine during the ongoing war, and also the urgent support that they need. I am also very, very excited about the powerful and amazing women that we have lined up for our panel discussion right after we break for lunch. We're going to hear from Ambassador Roya Rahmani, the first Afghan woman to serve as Ambassador of Afghanistan to both the United States and Indonesia, with more than 20 years of experience working within government roles, as well as Women for Women Country Director Boketa, who traveled all the way from the Democratic Republic of Congo to join us today. So Roya and Rochelle, thank you for being here. Thank you in advance for sharing your stories with us. Despite the many, many challenges of the last couple of years, events like this obviously help to remind us that we are far more similar than we are different. And I hope you all will leave here this afternoon knowing that we all, individually and united, have the power to create effective change. So coming up first is a special performance. I'd like to introduce Megan Kabir. She's a Grammy-nominated Afghan-American multi-platinum singer and songwriter. Though she has always been proud of her Afghan heritage, Megan felt a true calling after the fall of Kabul last August to use her voice and her platform to advocate for Afghan women. Today, Megan has chosen to perform the 2022 Oscar-nominated song, Somehow You Do, which is a powerful reminder, I think, that better days lay ahead, even in the darkest of moments. Joining her on stage is her friend and talented pianist Harlow. Growing up in Queens, New York, with a Ukrainian father and a Romanian mother, Harlow grew up hearing stories from her parents and grandparents about their lives in Eastern Europe and the traditions that they carried with them to America. As a songwriter, Harlow has penned tracks for some people you might have heard of: Celine Dion, Britney Spears, among others, and she's earned Grammy nominations. So please join me in welcoming Megan Kabir and Harlow to our stage.
Hello, how's everybody doing? It's such a pleasure to be here as an Afghan American and Harlow as a Ukrainian American. It's been really devastating to see the turn of events that have occurred in these countries and beyond. But working with Women for Women has truly been inspirational and helped me to use my voice in a bigger way. And this song, I hope it touches you as much as it's touched me. It's a beautiful message of hope, and I just am so thrilled to be here. So you're feeling like you've run out of hope, and you're carrying all that weight, and your back's about to break, and you're standing at the end of your rope, and you wanna give up the fight, 'cause you see no relief inside, and it's hard to keep the faith, but the darkest night will find the day. When you think it's the end of the road, it's just 'cause you don't know where the road's leading to. When you think that the mountain's too high and the ocean's too wide and you'll never get through, oh, some way, somehow you do. So you're feeling like you're right on the brink, and you're carrying all that weight, and your back's about to break. Yeah, I know you've been brought to your knees, but there's better days up ahead, and you'll be on your feet again, and it's hard to keep the faith, but the darkest night will find the day. When you think it's the end of the
Wow, let's get another round of applause. That was absolutely beautiful. Thank you, ladies. What a moving performance. Megan and Harlow. I'd like to now invite Delaney Steele, executive at Ross Stores, and also the co-chair of the Women for Women International's Board of Directors, as well as Lori Adams, CEO of Women for Women International. I'd like them to come up on stage. They're going to share with us how the organization invests in women survivors of war and conflict, connecting them with each other so they realize their own power and how you can all lend your support to this cause. Please join me in welcoming Delaney and Lori to the stage.
So thank you so much, Soledad, and thank you, Megan and Harlow, for that absolutely beautiful, heart-touching performance. Well, I've worked in conflict zones for decades, and one thing you learn in conflict zones is how to adapt. We've also learned that in COVID. So as you might notice, I'm not Amjad. Delaney's not Amjad. Amjad, our co-founder who was meant to be with us here tonight doing this part of the program, unfortunately has COVID. He's fine, but he didn't want to give it to all of us. So Delaney and I are filling in. It takes two of us because Amjad is so remarkable. And Seida, who we also hope to have with us tonight, is still in Central Europe, and so we're going to be hearing from her by video. But nonetheless, we are having the most incredible luncheon because all of you made it here, and thank you very much for that. It's really exciting. This is our first in-person event, our first luncheon in over 2 years, and it feels like both a reunion and an opportunity to meet so many new amazing people. So thank you for coming out. And we are very, very thrilled that who also made it here today is the former Afghan Ambassador, Roya Rahmani, who, as Soledad said, is part of the panel, and of course, Rochelle, who made it against significant visa challenges, COVID challenges. She had quite the story you can ask her about afterwards to make it here. So we've all learned how to overcome obstacles and adapt. So over to you, Delaney.
Great. Well, what we want to do first is tell you what Women for Women is. Many of you know what we do, but I see a lot of new faces as well. So we work in some of the most dangerous places in the entire world to be a woman. We work in countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and what we do is we go beyond the initial humanitarian response after war to do work that helps women rebuild their lives in a sustainable way, and you'll hear a lot more about that today. In the last almost 30 years, we've supported, as Soledad said, more than 530,000 women in 14 war-torn countries. Now, some of these countries you know are war-torn, but others you may not even be aware just how dangerous they are. So, for example, Nigeria with Boko Haram kidnapping girls, in eastern Congo, where crimes against women that are really horrible are not even really reported by the international media. But perhaps what I love most about Women for Women is our founding spirit that even in the face of some of the most egregious crimes that you've seen in humanity, we can actually really make a difference. That's part of our founding spirit. We like to say one woman can make a difference, but many women can change everything. So I wish that Amjad was here as our founder. I'm going to try to channel him as best as I can. But I wasn't there, but I've heard Amjad and Zainab, our other founder, talk a lot about what it was like. They were in their 20s, they were students, and they heard what was happening in Bosnia with the rape camps. And they flew over to Sarajevo in the middle of the siege, and they met with these women who had survived this genocide. And they knew they had to do something. So they went back home to the US, they started collecting money, and perhaps as importantly as the money they collected, they also collected letters of hope and solidarity from American women and men. And then they flew back to Sarajevo and they gave those to the women survivors of war. And those women then knew that the world had not forgotten them. So they felt respected, they felt empowered, they felt connected, and they had financial support. And that combination of things is really still the basis today of what our program is based on. So I wish our founders could be here so that we could recognize them directly, but it really is an amazing story.
So, as Delaney said, it is really well documented that when we support women to reach their full potential, they pass on those benefits to the broader family and communities. This creates a ripple effect that brings about sustainable change. And that's why we call our signature program Stronger Women, Stronger Nations, because we know that stronger women build stronger nations. And over the last 29 years, and this is something I'm so proud of, every year we adapt and improve this program based on the feedback from the women in our program and based on the data, and it gets better and better and better. But at the essential core of what happens is that women get together in groups of 25, where they earn and they learn together. They save money, they lend it to each other, they start businesses, they learn vocational skills, they learn about their rights, and most of all, they learn to believe in themselves and each other. And all of you know this, when you share your story with someone else and you know that you're no longer alone, that it was not you, because women so often are taught to shame ourselves, that it was our fault. So for women to learn that it's not their fault that this happened to them, and that it's happening to thousands of other women, and that it's possible to overcome, that is the real power of Women for Women. Our programs are led and implemented by local people like Rochelle, who you'll be speaking to later, and they understand the issues that women face, and they understand the very particular social norms that take place, because sexism and discrimination take different forms in different places. And if you're going to change these norms, you really have, without breaking relationships and without breaking down cultures and communities, you really have to know how to stretch without breaking it. So that's an essential and critical part, that while we work across multiple countries with the same approach, we adapt locally. And Afghanistan is such an important example of how we were able to adapt. I am so proud of our teams on the ground in Afghanistan, but also here. As you all know, the Taliban took over in August, and it was incredibly frightening. We had to close our programs for several months while we figured out how to adapt. But our local teams on the ground used the relationships that they already had. We have community protection committees where men stand up to help support women's rights. We had relationships with different political leaders. We had relationships with local religious leaders. And our program was really valued. And so we were able to restart. And we have been able to serve over 127,000 women in Afghanistan, and those programs continue now, and we have even expanded into a new province. We did a survey of Afghan women to find out, what do you most need now? And as you've also seen in the news, women were literally, could not feed their families and were going hungry. So we were able to provide, due to the very generous support, the outpouring of support that we got from all of you and other supporters when Kabul fell, we were able to give women $50 extra cash investment on top of the $10 stipends that they receive in order to get through the winter. And we were able to give poultry and gardening kits for them to be able to get food at home. So this is the kind of essential support that is helping women survive. But again, as Delaney said, and as we see over and over again, it was the ability of the women to get out of their homes and to get together again and process this trauma of what's happening to them. You've heard that just last week, the Taliban ruled that women have to wear burqas. We're struggling even with our own staff about what does this mean. And yet we are finding ways for women to be able to get out of their isolation, get together, and support each other. And that's the incredible power of Women for Women and our ability to adapt. And those adaptations have happened across COVID and across increasing conflict, and I couldn't be prouder.
So our core program, Stronger Women, Stronger Nations, is a very highly impactful program. So those of you who know me, and I'm looking at my colleagues and former colleagues, I love data. And we have tons of great performance data about the impact of this program. In fact, the World Bank has called both our measurement data and the impact of the program best in class. However, when a conflict is first emerging, we don't have the luxury to set up a 12-month program. That needs a little bit more stability as the conflict is kind of stabilizing a bit. But the needs of women in the middle of a conflict are intense. Think of the mental health needs that Lori alluded to. We also, for example, know that in Ukraine, like every war before it, rape by soldiers is very commonplace, but grossly underreported and not talked about. So there are real needs. And Women for Women, with almost 30 years of experience in conflict zones, knows what those needs are and how to address those needs. We also really focus on finding the women who are falling through the cracks, the women that didn't have the resources to fly to the US, or the women who aren't really being served by the humanitarian community. So that's why we founded the Conflict Response Fund. The Conflict Response Fund allows us to quickly go into very hot conflict zones and work through local partners, combining our expertise in conflict with the local knowledge on the ground. And that's how we've gone into originally Syria. That's right now we're working in Myanmar with the Rohingya genocide. We're working in Ethiopia and Tigray, and that's how we're entering Ukraine and Poland. So unfortunately, our Bosnian colleagues know a lot about this. I mean, I think none of us imagined that 29 years after Bosnia, we would be back here today talking about war in Europe, but here we are. So to tell us a little bit more about what's happening on the ground there and Women for Women support, I'm going to turn it over to Seida, who is still on the ground. Didn't want to make it out here because she has important work to do on the ground, but we'll show a video from Seida. She was, as Soledad said, our first country director, and she runs Zene, which I've been practicing, Women for Women in Bosnia.
We think of war as something that happens to other people, till it happens to you. I lived through war, and I know the trauma that women experience. My name is Seida Saric, and I'm Director of Zene, Women for Women International sister organization in Bosnia and Herzegovina. 30 years ago, my own country was at war. I lived through the siege of Sarajevo for 4 years. I experienced bombs, explosions, no food, no water. Particularly, it was difficult during the winter. It was so cold that we had to burn furniture. And when we ran out of furniture, we had to burn books. I have managed to exit siege of Sarajevo just for 1 month. And when I came to free territory, I felt so guilty. One morning I had a breakfast and I couldn't eat because I felt so guilty that I have food and I didn't know if my family had any food to eat in Sarajevo, or even if they were alive. I met and supported so many women during the war, And that helped me to continue to work with women survivors of the war. When Russia invaded Ukraine, because of my experience, I knew that we have to support women in this war too. A couple of weeks after invasion happened, my colleagues and myself went to Poland to speak with women who were crossing the border. We were watching and speaking with them, and what we learned is that all of them felt so guilty that they are safe, and that people who stayed in Ukraine going through hell. They really didn't want to leave their homes, and they couldn't believe that they will be refugees.
Звичайно, діти приїхали сюди за те, що йде війна, лише тільки тому, не за які там інші причини нас не було, бо покинути свою рідну землю. Рідна земля – це рідна земля, ви розумієте, ти їдеш, а в тебе сльози. Ти чуть і ти не можеш. Ну, надіюся, що я повернуся, що ми всі повернемося дуже скоро на свою рідну Україну.
There have been terrible reports of killing of civilians and war crime committed in Bucha and Kramatorsk. We also heard about many accounts of rape committed by soldiers. We have spoken to women who fled from Mariupol and who shared with us that when women are coming from occupied territories to free territories, that they are examined by a doctor who realized that women were exposed to sexual violence, but women can't talk about it. Besides of rape by soldiers, we have learned that women in conflict zones experience up to 60% increase of risk by intimate partner violence. And also for those women who are fleeing alone, they are exposed to trafficking in this chaotic time. That's why it is so important and so vital that we are offering survivor-centric response, providing trauma counseling and safe space for women and children who are making majority of refugees in this war. Urgently, we need support, financial support and funds to support our partners in Poland and in Ukraine and provide psychosocial support, psychological support, domestic violence counseling and prevention.
As you heard from Seida, women need access to critical services like psychosocial counseling, given the trauma of this war. Some of them have spent weeks in shelters and cellars without access to water, heating, or food, and they're severely traumatized by their experience, also worried about their families. Some of them, as you heard, have been raped and subjected to violence. They need trauma-informed care and dedicated safe spaces to gather. This is not something that the traditional humanitarian organizations that I've spent many years of my life working for are in a good position to find. So we've identified local partners, partners who've come across flood as well into the border in Poland, Berechenia and Human Doc Foundation, and also right now we've identified a number of partners in Ukraine. These are women on the ground who understand the culture, who understand the needs, and can meet the specific needs of women fleeing from Ukraine or displaced in Ukraine, or just suffering the conflict in Ukraine.
So I just noticed that Zainab,
Oh, is she come?
one of our founders, is here. She just arrived. Zainab, I did my best to try to represent what it was like for you to go to Bosnia, but If you don't mind standing and being recognized. Zainab, you honestly, I met you for the first time in 2006. You're such a visionary. You were the one who recognized that the needs of women of war were not being met by the humanitarian community. So, please stand and thank you for everything you've done. I think we take for granted now this understanding that if you invest in women, they will invest in their families, in their communities. It's kind of well understood and, like Lori said, well documented. But 30 years ago, that wasn't as well documented and understood. And Zainab really was one of the pioneers of getting that message out. So thank you. And it's great to see you in person again. So, from the very early days of Zainab and Amjad collecting money and literally delivering it in person in Bosnia to today, the lifeblood of this organization are individual donors and supporters. So we want to just pause and take a moment to say thank you. First, let me say thank you to the Luncheon Committee. The Luncheon has been our signature event for over a decade with a little hiatus. So thank you to the Luncheon Committee. You guys invested a lot of time to pull this off under some kind of challenging circumstances. So thank you to all of you. Lori and I also want to say a very special thank you to the Luncheon's co-founders, Lynn Shanahan and Barbara Perlmutter. Lynn couldn't be here today, but has spent many years working with Women for Women. And Barbara, we really want to single you out today. You have spent many years on the board advancing our mission. You've connected us to some of the most loyal supporters of the organization. We just can't thank you enough.
So I also want to ask my thanks to Barbara. It's really in very large part to your tenacity, your drive, your vision, that this luncheon has become a fixture, as I understand it, on the New York scene, and such a valuable part of our Women for Women international community. Many of you that I've seen coming over the years, many of you have been here longer than I have in telling me about the great luncheons that have gone past. You've paid such great attention to particular details, from the flowers to the meals to the program, and it's that particular attention that has made these events so, so special. So I know that you don't like being in the limelight, you like being behind the scenes, but we're going to channel your former marketing director self and stand up so that we can say a big thank you to you, Barbara.
Thank you again, Barbara. And then our final thanks for the day is to Jan Rock. Jan was a huge force behind the Conflict Response Fund, and Jan was the board chair before me and Amjad. An amazing, remarkable woman, an amazing, remarkable board chair. Jan was a very successful executive for many years and has applied a lot of strategic and operational insight. You've connected us to your expansive network and really blown everyone away with your commitment of time and money and passion. So I have to say, I was a little intimidated to succeed you as the board chair, but I appreciate your coaching and thought partnership on that. Words can't even convey the impact you've made on the organization, on the women we serve, and frankly, to me, personally, you're really an aspiration of how I want to use my resources to give back. So thank you to Jan Rock.
So I do just have to also say thank you to Jan, because Jan was my board chair when I first became CEO. And they always say being a CEO is lonely, and being a new CEO can be quite scary, especially when it's an organization full of such amazing, powerful women. So Jan, being able to work alongside you, it was just a fabulous, fabulous way to start my time with this organization. So I also will be forever grateful for your guidance and for your impact on this organization, and I am so thrilled that you have continued on in leadership. Jan is still very active on the board, and we're not letting her go anywhere, so thank you.
Thank you, Jan. So the point of the luncheon is both to spread the word about what's happening out there in the world, and let's cut to the chase. It's also to raise money to help these women, survivors of war, reclaim their power. And honestly, I know that it can feel a little hopeless and powerless out there. There's so much going on in the world that's not good. You know, there are more than 80 million people displaced from their homes currently, and 26 million of them are in other countries as refugees. That's more than any other time in the world, in history. So, you know, my husband, Sean, and those of you who know Sean will understand this is what he says. He says stuff like, oh, I don't know, I mean, it just feels like it's impossible to make an impact. It's kind of hopeless. So what did I do? I took him to Rwanda with me because I wanted him to see the program firsthand. Now, you'll recall, Rwanda had a genocide where 800,000 people were brutally killed in a matter of only months, and very rampant, aggressive sexual violence occurred. Sean and I met women who saw their kids killed in front of them. We met women who had had kids themselves out of rape. We met women who had been so generous and taken in a lot of orphans, but then didn't have the resources to feed them or send them to school. As a mom, I thought a lot about the intergenerational impacts of war. We were in Rwanda a full generation after the genocide, and still the impact was so profound. How, if you are so traumatized by war, can you raise your children in a healthy way? And can you contribute to society, a healthy society? We met women who had not really even left their houses or spoken for years. And yet they went through the program and they reclaimed their voice. It was actually amazing for him to see, I had seen it before, but for him to see what women were like before they started the program, and then at graduation, and then after graduation as they were running their own businesses. It was really amazing. What was also amazing was to see the graduation. The entire community would come out, including the male elders, and the women who were graduating would get up and sing and dance, and they would talk about how their husbands were now helping in the household, and then the husbands would get up and say, yes, yes, I'm helping in the household. And some of the women brought belongings that they had gotten with their income, with their new vocational training. In fact, some of the women brought mattresses with them. But what I loved most about the graduation were the kids. There were hundreds of kids watching this. And I thought, what incredible role modeling this is for all these kids to watch these women who have been so empowered and for the community to gather around them. So that's the ripple effect I was just talking about. Helping the women, help their families, help the community. And that is really what sustains the change. So I want to leave with one final thought between us and more food, which is that what Women for Women does is really unique. There's no other organization that focuses on women survivors of war, addressing both the near-term needs and the long-term needs in a sustained way. So I hope that over the next course of lunch, you will socialize, you'll reflect, and you'll give, and you'll be part of the ripple effect. So thank you to everyone for being here. Zainab, thank you for coming and founding the organization, more importantly, and enjoy.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Oh, my mic is working. Fantastic. I hope everybody has enjoyed their lunch. I wanted to start our next section by first just hearkening back to Seida's interview where we had her on videotape. It was so powerful and so moving, and I really just want to recognize her and thank her for sharing her story of surviving the siege in Sarajevo and talking about all that she has witnessed unfolding during the war in Ukraine. It was just remarkable. Also, of course, a giant thank you for Delaney and Lori telling us in great detail about Women for Women International's incredible work. We so appreciate you. Delaney, wow, I was crying as you were really thanking women who are important to you. Amazing remarks, so thank you guys, appreciate it. In this portion, we wanted to have a conversation to really explore some of the very important work that Women for Women International is doing. So I'd like to recognize Ambassador Rahmani and Rochelle Boketa to our stage, and I will give you brief introductions and then we'll start our conversation. I want to remind you at the end of our discussion, I'm going to open this up for questions from the audience, so feel free to raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone to you, and you can ask questions of my two panelists as well. So first, Ambassador Rahmani, in addition to her 2 decades of experience as a diplomat, Ambassador Rahmani is Director General for Regional Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Afghanistan in her past, Senior Advisor at the Atlantic Council South Asia Center, Senior Fellow for International Security at the New America Foundation, a current Distinguished Fellow at the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, and I believe in a new position as well that we'll talk about in just a little bit. Madam Ambassador, thank you for joining us today. It's a real honor and a pleasure to have you.
It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Joining Ambassador Rahmani is Rochelle Boketa of the Democratic Republic of Congo, where she manages programs that have served more than 100,000 women since 2004. Before joining Women for Women, Rochelle had more than 21 years of experience in the development and humanitarian sector, has dedicated the past 15 years to promoting gender equity and women's empowerment, working with UNICEF and USAID and UN Women and Seida, and has traveled a very long way to be here through some obstacles that I'm sure she can share with you a little bit later. So thank you for all your efforts to be here. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
It's an honor to be here.
Wonderful. So I'll begin with you, if I may, Madam Ambassador. First, talk to us a little bit about your new position, as I mentioned. I gave a long list of your resume, and then I want you to talk about women's rights and how there are often conversations about women's rights that ignore the actual voices of women in these conversations. But fill us in on your new position and then talk to me a little bit about that.
Thank you so much. It was basically a backroom conversation I had. I was not going to open it up here. But
never share anything with a reporter because it will not be sacred.
Yeah, I forgot my training to say off the record. That was the key word. Thank you for that. I just shared that I am joining private sector and I have just very recently joined them and looking forward to be working on issues that matter to all of us. In fact, the firm that I'm joining has a very interesting agenda through establishing a bank that would be women-led for merchant capital. So it is going to be an interesting adventure. And let me also tell you a little bit about why I decided to go that route. And it relates to the question that you were raising about rights and women's rights and human rights and the neglecting their voices and presence. Of course, I'm from Afghanistan. I grew up in Afghanistan. I have lived through war, being a refugee, leaving everything behind and fleeing from one country to another. I have seen it and done it all. And it breaks my heart every day that I wake up and I have the luxury to send my daughter to school, to have a meal at home, and so many more do not have it, like we heard in the video that was shared. So, but in all of this, why women's voices are not heard and reflected? Because they have never made a party. Starting with my country, which I have only known my country to be in war, in conflict. And in all these decades, when it comes to women, they are there when they are talked about as victims, as vulnerables, as needy, and so the same goes with how women are talked about in the case of Ukraine nowadays. But when it comes to the solutions, where they are the one that delivering and bringing the solution, they are not there. They haven't been there. In the negotiations and peace building, which is the core of everything, from a place like where I come from, they are absent. They are absent, their perspective is absent. And why? It's because they are not a party with guns. It is always peace and peacemaking, basically, or resolution of conflict done by a group of people who own guns, who control the war. And then they come together to make peace. So why women's voices would be important here is that very different perspective that would talk about things that is other than war, then other than victory, other than one group winning to the other one. And that perspective is missing. And my transition to this new field has been also that you need to be empowered, you need to have a say, you need to be a party economically, politically, and socially in order that your voice could be heard. And this is something that I have gone like sort of full circle. The other idea is to bring change into the systems. You really need to have influence, have to have a seat at the table. And that's not something that cannot happen. In fact, I think Women for Women is so thoughtful, and this is why their name is Women for Women, that they placed me in this lovely hotel that has Irish influence. So one of the first things I usually do when I go to check into a room in a hotel is look around the decorations and see what is going on. So in my room, there is a picture, a framed saying, basically, from Mary Robinson. And that says, I was elected by women in Ireland who, instead of rocking the cradle, decided to rock the system. So it is time, really, that these women who have taken the backseat come forward, rock the system, because as the World Economic Report predicts, it takes 138 years for us to achieve gender parity in the pace that we are going. This is too long, at least for me. I'm afraid I will be old then. So let's speed that up and lean in, come forward, take a seat at every table, and make sure that our voices and that very unique perspective that will break the echo chamber is heard.
I want to talk more about rocking the system and exactly, tactically, specifically how we do that. But first, Rochelle, I want to ask you a question. We know we're in the middle of several might not be enough of a number, several crises unfolding all at the same time, political, increasing conflict, obviously. Talk to us a little bit about the DRC, the challenges that you're facing there, what's happening to the women, the marginalized women who are in your programs. What's the outlook look where you are?
Thank you, Soledad. I think I should start by briefing you a little bit about the context so that when I talk about women, you understand better. The DRC has been in conflict for decades now. So these conflicts have been ongoing but unreported. There are so many untold stories of the conflict in Eastern DRC that the situation is devastating, if I can say so. In the DRC, but despite that context of conflict and insecurity, for instance, if you look at the latest Women, Peace and Security data for 2021 and 22, DRC is ranked among the bottom in class, together with South Sudan, by the way, and Afghanistan, where we have our programs. So it's that context of insecurity, and as you know, women bear the huge part of it because they are subject to sexual violence. They are farmers. Whenever they go to farm, they have been abused by all these rebel groups out there. So it's something that nobody controls, not even the national army. And beyond that, beyond the insecurity, gender equality, if I can say the path to gender equality in the DRC is not only grounded in that insecurity, but also in cultural norms and traditional practices which are very harmful for women, such as, child marriage and settling amicably issues of sexual violence, where they can tell a woman who has been violated to get married to the perpetrator. So there are awful things going on there. So the difficulty that we face, like as Women for Women, as an organization, as professional, at the core of it, it's insecurity. There are days where we can't go to work because it's not safe out there. And there are instances where we have to shut down our training center. As you know, our program is a 12-month graduation program, and the services we provide to women is through those training centers, and then we have to shut them down because we cannot allow women to go, to leave their home, to go to training center because they have been exposed. And now I would like to say that we stand in solidarity with women out there in Ukraine because we still share a hope for peace. But that war has also impacted places where I work, in Bukavu, for instance. It's one of the expensive towns in the DRC, which relies on manufactured products from outside, and the cost of transport adds on this, so it's already expensive. And with the increased prices in fuel and oil, that is the consequence of the war in Ukraine, it's just unbearable. I may explain, those women that we train through 12 months, we support them start their business when they graduate. We provide startup kits and according to their vocational track they choose. So if we take the example of those who do bakery, for instance, they choose to do bakery, they use a lot of flour and a lot of oil, and the price is just skyrockets. So if we could, the money we could provide, the budget we plan for 25 maybe bags of flour, it will not be enough because prices have increased. So that is also impacted on that, we want to promote women's economic empowerment, but we are ending up creating poverty because it's clear that somebody might say, okay, if the prices increase, the bread should increase. But those who buy, they are also poor. If you look at the data out there, like the Human Development Report, in the DRC, like 70% of the population live below $2 per day. So the population itself is poor, and we cannot expect women to say, okay, we might increase the price of the bread and they will buy it. So it's just unbearable. So there are so many interlinked problems, but at the core of it, it's insecurity.
You mentioned, Ambassador, rocking the system. And I'd love to dive into that a little more deeply, especially if you think about how we can help amplify the voices of Afghan women. At the moment, the attention of the world seems to be focused on Ukraine. And having worked in cable news, I know sort of shiny object, shiny object, shiny object. The audiences sort of flit and the news sort of flits to that. How do you think we can both help women around the globe rock the system and also help specifically amplify the voices of women who are struggling when at the moment the spotlight is not on them, right? The conversation is not about the DRC right now. The conversation has moved away from Afghanistan right now. What would your, maybe I'll start with you and then you could join in as well. What would you say is the best strategy to rock the system?
Sure. I would summarize that with 3 words, basically. The first one is will, the second one is humility, and the third one is courage. Why do I mention these 3 specific words? The first one, will, is because in the situation of conflict, as we heard, it is always massive chaos. It is a mode of survival. It is very difficult to get the people to think about the future, to work on their vision. So those who can influence from outside, which is always the case one way or another in the situations of conflict, and the clear example of it is my own country, is that where the will of those who intervene lies, and to what degree. Because I'm not fully still sold on to this idea that we can only pay attention to one thing at a time. Today we are thinking about DRC, tomorrow it's Yemen, the day after is Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, and each chapter, each page that we turn, we completely forget what we read in the previous one. So I think will is essential there. That to empower women, people, communities, there should be a very strong will, because the will find the way. Second, humility is what Women for Women International does. Ask the people. Ask what they need. Have that humility that you can't go with a prescription and say, this works for you, because it doesn't. Have the humility to go and know and realize that you are learning along this experience, that this is something that can happen anywhere. And then see what they are asking. And then have the courage to take that answer and then also bring creativity. Think out of the box. Do design and implement policies that you haven't done before. Because those that if you have done and failed, they are not going to succeed next time. So, and then also not have the courage to dig deeper, to try to understand, or not to give an opinion if you don't know. Like, for example, just we spoke about it, this new news about Afghanistan and the decree that every woman should wear a burqa, and some people say, is it culture? Is it like just a tradition? Are they just bringing it back? Is it the revival of it? No, it's not. It is not the culture. The culture of Afghanistan is that women are the best people who resolve conflicts. Because whenever there were a tie, traditionally they brought an elderly woman or a younger woman, but mostly not so young because there would be other implications, but then have the woman come among the men and resolve that conflict. There is a very specific practice of that has been in century in the country, not burqa. Burqa is like one of the things that, one of the choices or practices that some people chose to do when they did, and they were free to do it. Like many other people in different countries have different practices.
When you think about rocking the system, how do you think people should think strategically to keep the issues that matter to you specifically front and center, while also understanding that there are so many crises unfolding around the globe right now?
Yes, you know, Soledad, in my country, there are 5.5 million internally displaced persons. So that's like the second largest in the entire universe. There are over 27 million of population severely, in malnutrition. So these are figures. When you look at them, you might say, okay, we should not divert the support we provide. So for me, I will call on all our supporters, so thank you for being here, and the so-called international community and all governments to stay focused. You know, they always do contingency planning. I know that for being in humanitarian field for more than 20 years now. Those contingency planning, sometimes you don't have time to implement them when conflict arises. So what I will do is like a word of advocacy. It's not to divert. It's true that, you know, crisis happens in different places, some more, you know, actual than others, but there are still problems around the world. So for me, if they can't divert the support they provide, but address every country's needs at the same time, that could make this world a better place to live.
How are you seeing the participants of Women for Women International's programs in the DRC helping those participants reclaim their power, their social power, their economic power? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, you know, first of all, I should say I felt in love with Women for Women. That's why I joined. Because women's economic empowerment has been the core of my interest for the last 15 years, working on gender equality. And when I saw that solicitation, I said, that is something in my mind, so let's try that. So I joined. Although I'm relatively new because I've been there for 6 months only, but I know that since the organization started in 2004, we have reached over 100,000 women in the DRC, and that's huge, but needs are still there. And you know, most of the women that enroll in our program are illiterate, but when they walk out of there, they report employment. So this is something that, you know, it's not because I'm part of Women for Women, but I can say I'm still an outsider that I've seen, you know, I've witnessed all the awesome job that is being done there. I can tell you, I met with one traditional leader, you know, those who are like guardians of tradition. And then he told me, say, Rachel, you know, now I am so happy to provide land title to women, where, by the way, they don't have access to land. In that culture, women cannot own a land. But you see one traditional leader, because he has been part of our program, because beyond the women, support to women, we also have a male engagement program that try to build up like champions and allies for women's empowerment. And that traditional chief has been there. And he was at the ceremony providing land title. These are life-changing stories, you know. You meet a lady who tells you, you know, I am a widow, I have 6 kids, I was on the street working in people's farm when they pay me 2,000 Congolese francs per day, which exactly equivalent of $1 per day. So to sustain herself and their 6 children, and then she joins the program, and then she tells you, see what I now own. I own a plot of land because I've been part of that business group and we're doing well. We have our VSLA, by the way, VSLA is Village Saving and Loans Association, where we save money, and then I've been able to buy a solar panel where electricity does not exist. But her house has light because she has been part of our program. So I think these are things like we have to support Women for Women. Even us, you know, working from inside, we really need to work, you know, to maintain that spirit.
Women for Women, oh, I should mention, I'm going to have this as my last question, and then I'm going to open it up to anybody in the audience who has a question for our panelists. Women for Women International's core program, which I mentioned in my opening remarks, is called Stronger Women, Stronger Nations. And I'd love for both of you to tell me what you think what a strong, empowered woman looks like. What is the impact of a strong and empowered woman? Ambassador, why don't you start, and then we'll go to you next.
Sure. Let me start bigger picture and then try to zoom in, but I will try to be brief too. Try. At the global level, let's look what women leadership brings. A clear example of it is right in front of our eyes. We may not have forgotten the pandemic. Look at the nations that were led by women. How did they manage the pandemic? Which countries managed it best? I'm not trying to put all the wonderful gentlemen down here, but there is an element of that multidimensional thinking that I believe went into that. So those empowered women took care of their people, of their nations. They managed the pandemic. This is what empowered women were able to do. At the national level, pick any of your favorite leaders. Generally, you do not find those nations that are led by women, and women have a big role in politics and economy going into wars. In the family level, this is the core of the society. Women, empowered women, provide an egalitarian system for their household. In this household, everybody understands that everybody deserves respect. This is where the culture of peace is nurtured. And for the empowered, strong women themselves, well, it is a ton of work and lots of struggle. But I'm hoping and I'm seeing that nevertheless lots of fun too.
Rochelle.
Thank you, Soledad. You know, we grow up in patriarchal societies where in people's thinking, empowering women can lead to disempowering men. So for me, being a stronger woman, it's one, having access to education, because I see it like an open door to so many opportunities. And second, be able to make decisions. Because if you look at my country, for instance, women are less represented at decision-making level, so nobody channels their voice and their concerns and their needs. So if we can achieve those, I think that will create stronger women and, of course, eradicate violence. I can give my own example. I'm a firstborn in a family, and after me, I had three brothers at that time. And my father used to say, my firstborn is like the little brother, not daughter, not sister, but the little brother I've never had, because he's the last born of his family. And then he trained me the same way than my brother. He was encouraging me. So if it was not for my father, maybe I shouldn't have been educated and been sitting here with you today. So that took me, I took that in heart to empower the young generations. You know, those adolescent girls who have been left out of school because of poverty, and then the families give privilege to boys to attend school. It's for those adolescent girls I would like to stand. So I would like to have little Hachels over DRC that can stand and say, we have had that chance to go to school and we are somebody in life today.
Great. I'd like to open it up to questions. If you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll get someone to run a microphone right to you. Who has a question for me? Oh, right here. Will you stand up for me so we can get this mic right to you? Thank you.
Thank you. My question is for Ms. Roya Rahmani. This is Farshna Kanjabi. I'm founder and director of...
May I stop you right there? Pull the mic up super close, just like that. Thank you.
Okay.
Much better. Thank you.
This is Farshna Kanjabi. I'm founder and director of Elena's Light. It's a non-profit organization in Connecticut. It's aiming to building brighter future for refugee women and children. I have two amazing people here, the board member and also one of the program development director with us. The reason I'm asking you question because I'm an Afghan refugee too. First of all, I want to thank you, dear ambassador, for your services and your help and support for Afghanistan overall. I heard a lot of good things and read a lot of good things on the news about you and on the internet. It's my honor to be here to see you. My question.
May I stop you for 1 second? I am really sorry. We have a terrible like echo. So bring that phone right up here. We're going to read your question from here, if I may. Sorry to make you do the stairs.
No.
But we're hearing every word like 3 times. So come right, come on up. Why not? We're problem solvers up here. Will you show it to me and then I'll read it to everybody? Where is it, right here?
Yeah, okay, good. It's here.
This one right there. Do you have any plan or program for new Afghan refugee women who have evacuated recently into the United States? Can you talk about any specific plan that you particularly think is a good one? Thank you for your question. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. I'm not answering as me. I wish I could,
yes.
but a few places that I'm involved in and a few things that I'm aware of are the following. Number one, as you mentioned, I'm a fellow with the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security, where they have been very much involved in evacuating women leaders from Afghanistan, and they have been helping with the resettlement programs. So as part of that, we have been continuously in touch with State Department, with the rest of the stakeholders, trying to influence and make room or provide them with the possibility to meet with the people who have recently been evacuated and to hear from them, to hear firsthand their issues that they have. Secondly, I have had the pleasure of working with a huge number of members of Congress. So we are still keeping in touch, and one of the things that we are continuously doing is pushing things in Congress, making sure that those bills that is basically going to determine their future moving forward, once they have been admitted, for example, in the United States as parolees, and they get a status for 2 years, what happens after 2 years? And this is completely vague. Is the second avenue that we are pushing, and there is things in the pipe, things are moving. And the third one is, of course, providing advice and support and working with the organization who are directly involved with the resettlement programs and projects. I must also say that one of the things that I personally do in my little capacity is whenever I have a chance, I try to unpack this as somebody who has had these experiences and explain that when a new family as refugees come and settle in your neighborhood, they are going to be your neighbors. They are going to be your family. So it is very difficult to really understand what they have been through. Basically, the easiest way is that if you were to think about, you will just take your handbags next to you and have to run and leave and not look behind and go somewhere else completely alien to you. In most cases, even the language is the one that you are not speaking, and start it all over again. So it's a very difficult and traumatizing experience. That's why they say that immigrants are best entrepreneurs, because they're risk takers. They have to start, right? And keep starting and restarting over and over and not give up. So pay attention to your neighborhood and just do it with this mindfulness that they have been through a huge trauma, and in the future, they are going to be the classmates, partners, business or life of your own children.
Really great advice. Thank you. Do I have time for one more question? One more question. Excellent. Do I have one more? Right here. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you to all the organizers and everyone involved for putting on such a phenomenal luncheon. I've shed some tears and learned so much. And thank you for the question about, I found it very interesting, Soledad, when you were talking about these hotspots of crisis and how media also is jumping and all of our attention is jumping. And, you know, it took me back to hearing, even in reference to the Ukraine crises, comments being made in the media such as, you know, these people aren't used to having crisis or having war or living through these hardships, which, you know, guides one to think that there's definitely some implicit biases, perhaps still, about those affected. And as Rachel was telling about the magnitude of the crises and trauma in Congo, you know, I realized I didn't understand the extent of it. And I'm wondering if race is playing a role in, you know, your thoughts on that.
Great question. Do you want to tackle that? What role is race playing when we talk about hotspots of crisis and how much attention they get? And also the mindset around, well, some people just are used to chaos and other people are not.
Yes, you know, I may start by saying the role of like the community with large. So you are in front of people who are not educated. You are in front of people who have fled their homes and they have lost their livelihoods and dignity. So at a point, they just look at you and then think that you are bringing solution. So that's one part. And on the other side, you have the politics, the government, who have all other priorities because they have, you know, to respond to that war. So all the government budget is going to other things like buying equipment and instead of, you know, like implementing those so-called contingency planning they made. And then we come into play as Women for Women, for instance. So what do we do? Because even those humanitarian action, I've been there for 22 years now, they do not provide like concrete answers to the population who have been, you know, in that kind of trauma. But Women for Women, we work with community at grassroots level because that is more sustainable than, you know, tackling the politics issue. So with community, we build resilience, we build capacity, you know, we help them create some safety nets, you know, to protect, for instance, women against violence and abuse, and that is what remains in community. And if you go where we implement our program, they will tell you Women for Women is the only organization that is staying long. Others come for 3 months and then leave because they are humanitarian. They come, they provide support, they leave. But we stay longer to build those communities. And I think that makes a difference. I hope this answers the question.
Maybe I can add a piece to that, which is I think she's saying you can get past issues of race when you focus on community building and less on sort of racial division. Thank you. Big thank you for our panelists. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Ambassador Rahmani, Michelle as well. I'm going to invite Lori to come right back up.
Wow. Let's all thank Soledad, Roya, and Rochelle again.
Thank you.
That was a really, really important discussion, and I think we learned quite a bit about Congo. We were inspired to help rock the system. I do want to add on to the answer to that question in that the reason I came to Women for Women is that this is an organization that's been built out of solidarity. It's an organization that doesn't say, oh, there's those poor people over there that somehow, you know, are different than us and we need to help. Because of Zainab's founding vision and mission, an Iraqi survivor herself, but also a visionary, this is one woman here helping another woman there because her trauma and my trauma are linked, because our futures are inextricably connected, and because her life matters just as much as mine. And frankly, if you invest in her, you're probably going to see a whole lot more change because of that incredible will and courage that Roya talked about. So it is just such a privilege to work for this organization. I have been so lucky to be able to visit each of our programs, and I could spend the whole afternoon giving you amazing stories about how women facing just the most impossible situations get up, take care of their families, take care of themselves, rebuild their lives, rebuild their communities, and create incredible things. The place I was most recent, before COVID hit, was in March, and it was in Congo. And I met a woman called Beatrice, and she was maybe 22, 23, and she was 3 months into our program. She'd only just started. And she had been through horrors and back. Raped by a soldier when she was young, taken on the road through the various bush camps, lost her child, family wouldn't accept her back, and that's just the start of it. And she's only 23 or 24. And she said, when I joined this program and I got my first amount of cash, she said, I knew I could believe in myself again because someone on the other side of the world believed in me. That solidarity, that, you know, and it made me cry because this is really sad, like $10 is so little, and yet for her it meant so much. And it wasn't the actual amount, but it was that, and this is the incredible thing about Women for Women, right? We are here for the economic, like Rochelle said. It's like, yes, they're starting businesses and stuff, but that does not work unless women believe in themselves and unless they have the support of each other. So it's that incredible combination of the social and the economic and the political together, which is really quite unique. Taking a women's rights approach in a conflict setting over the long term so that we're still there 20 and 30 years later. And as Delaney said so powerfully, that intergenerational is really, really important. So that's the uniqueness, that's the power. You've heard a lot, so I'm not gonna say more about that, but I do, and I do wanna say one more time, so maybe you don't want to rock the system, so you can instead take the advice that Samantha Powers was a speaker, I think at our last event, and she said, when you're feeling overwhelmed, shrink the change. And know that by investing in just one woman, you are creating a change in her life, which changes an entire ecosystem. And so that's the power of our sisterhood model, that's the power of the Women for Women. And that's what we've invited you to invest in. And I saw after Delaney asked you all to give, I saw many of you giving already, but I would just like to point out one more time that you do have your pledge cards. There's also a QR code at the back of your program, and there's also staff around with iPads. So if you would like to shrink the change and invest in a woman like Rochelle and the women that she is supporting, you have that opportunity again. And as you're thinking about that, I do have to say just a couple more thank yous, and that is to our incredible team. I would like Latoya and Needy and Ramon and all the staff who helped make this event stand up, please. It took quite a lot of will and humility and courage to put this event together through very many iterations, so I do want to thank you. I also want to thank Delaney, my incredible co-chair and co-host, who was pivoting over and over again and for stepping up, so thank you also to Delaney. But most of all, thank you all to all of you. You came out, you've invested your time, and it's through all of us together that we really can make the change. So thank you for coming, and thank you for your support.